The Final Four is set with Duke in North Carolina, Villanova in Kansas as we head towards the national championship chase in the college basketball landscape. There's 2 weeks to go in the NBA. Down the stretch we come, but we're going to talk about that next week in the NBA. Today is all college basketball, and we're also giving our flowers to the greatest head coach of all time in college basketball history. But first, we're going to talk about this second weekend, which I found fascinating. My voice is a little bit off. As you can tell, anniversary weekend, went to the casino, yelling, screaming, having a good time. We took a little mini road trip down to just past Portland. Went and got some In-N-Out burger that got a little bit closer. We hadn't had In-N-Out burger since our honeymoon 5 years ago. 5-year wedding anniversary for us. And getting away from the kid, it was great. It was just recharging. It was Phil. It was great. It was just a fun, phenomenal time, and could not have asked for a better weekend. But an interesting one at that from a hoop perspective, because the second weekend in March, first of all, Season 8, Episode 28 here, March 29th, 2022. Again, the last Tuesday in March as we head down the stretch towards April and the last 2 weeks of the NBA regular season. Okay, the second weekend in March Madness history for me, as I've watched this thing for years as somebody who does a show and somebody who loves hoop and somebody who breaks down hoop, as I've watched the sport over time and see how it plays out, watching the regular season, watching the first round, conference tournaments, just everything on all angles. As somebody who knows when to pinpoint the best games of the year, generally the second weekend is the weekend where you can pinpoint and say, oh yeah, that's where the best teams are going to face off, even if it's teams like St. Peter's or teams like North Carolina or Miami or Iowa State. Like even if those teams sneak through, generally the best basketball is played in the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight, because those teams all broke through and played good teams. So now they're going to play their A game, and it's going to be phenomenal matchups and big-time teams playing off against one another. And usually the adjustments can be made and things can be figured out, and it's really, really fun because from a purist perspective, it's great. And I'll be honest with you, this weekend, outside of Texas Tech and Duke, which that was really the only game I really sat back, analyzed, watched from an entirety perspective, it was really just a lot of burnt basketball. And what do I mean by that? When you watched this past weekend, the Elite Eight, outside of Houston Villanova, which by the way, I had money on that game. I had Villanova and the points, and I had Villanova's and Houston in the under because everybody had them scoring about 126 points. That wasn't going to happen. They're both defensive prowesses. They both play slow. Houston's known for their defense, and they played great defense. It was a good game. But outside of that game, Arkansas Duke was okay. It was a competitive game until halftime, and then after that, it was really just kind of a nonsense game. And then both games Sunday were trash. I mean, Kansas absolutely, yeah. Early on, it was back and forth, and Miami looked good, but then Kansas just ran away with it in the second half. North Carolina pounded St. Peter's from the jump. You knew that was going to happen. You knew St. Peter's was going to run out of steam. I mean, obviously, from a entertainment perspective, from a perspective on watching the NCAA tournament and seeing how it played out on a national level as a casual fan, watching the St. Peter's Purdue game was fantastic. From a purist basketball perspective, and this is the point where I'm talking about getting burnt. When you're watching the St. Peter's Purdue game, Purdue comes out of the second half they come into the second half and they look absolutely like legs look dead. They don't look like they're ready to play, and they can't hit a shot to save their life in the first 5 minutes. Then they play well in the next 10 minutes, but then the last 5 minutes of the game, again, power outage until the last minute when, they could finally, hold their own, do what they had to do to try and survive. But they could not hit the, side of a barn door if they were, side of a barn wall if they were in the, if they were 2 feet away. They were awful. And St. Peter's took advantage. St. Peter's was hot. St. Peter's was running their offense, doing what they could do. Purdue was playing good defense. St. Peter's just wanted it more. I don't know if Purdue hit a wall physically, if Purdue just couldn't play their game of basketball, if they weren't hitting shots. And I remember rewatching that second half the last 10 minutes, and honestly, it looked like Purdue just wasn't hitting their shots. And obviously, there were St. Peter's rebounds that were phenomenal, and from an effort and passion perspective, it was beautiful basketball in regards to the entertainment value. But from the basketball purist perspective, I don't know what it is, but all the teams who we all thought were going to do something in the NCAA tournament, they just looked flat. Again, minus the Duke and Texas Tech game on Thursday night. Gonzaga looked flat against Arkansas in the second half. They just faded. Villanova and Michigan was a lot closer until the end. Arizona just absolutely got annihilated by Houston in the second half. And then on Friday, Purdue just couldn't hit it. Like I said, they couldn't hit the ocean with a rock. Kansas and Providence. Kansas almost folded in the second half with the last 5 minutes. Providence took the lead when Kansas was taking care of business the whole game. North Carolina, UCLA was interesting, but UCLA folded in the second half, and they looked terrible. And then Miami and Iowa State. Miami just absolutely destroyed them. So usually in the Sweet 16 and then in the Elite Eight, I just mentioned it. Outside of a couple games, this was really not that great of a weekend. I think the Final Four is going to be phenomenal. You got UNC, you got Duke, you've got Kansas and Villanova, 2 championship head coaches. But overall, when you look at this second weekend of March, I think the weekend of the second round, I felt like this year the second round of March Madness was the best basketball all year long. The effort, the detail, the everything I mentioned in the last show was all there. For some reason, in this second weekend, I don't know if it's how kids do things these days. I don't know if it's how this current generation operates. I got no idea. All I can do is speculate. But a lot of the good teams in that Sweet 16 round just looked burnt out, and they looked like they had dead legs. And maybe it was because they all had 2 or 3 days off. They didn't just play intense basketball. For the last 2.5 weeks, they'd been going through conference tournaments and 2 incredible games. You have to play in the first round with a massive amount of intensity, a massive amount of interest, and teams you've probably never seen before having to adjust, all those things. And then now you get 3 days off to not focus on anything, travel, and go play another really, really good team that's, coming off of an emotional weekend or whatever with nothing to lose and all that. And they just didn't play great for a lot of those teams, and it was just not very entertaining overall. Like I said, outside of maybe 3 or 4 games this weekend, it was not that entertaining. And it was really not that good of basketball. And I don't know what that is. Maybe it was just a fluke year. Because sometimes you get fluky years, sometimes you get fluky things. But that second round in the first weekend of March Madness was phenomenal. There was like 5 to 6 to 7 just elite basketball games almost every day. I mean, every day you had an elite game. And usually I don't watch the first round because it's gotten more watered down to me. But that second round was great. There was some unbelievable matchups, great basketball. That just didn't pan out in the second weekend. And I've been doing this for a long time. I've been doing this as a guy who's done a podcast, as a casual fan. I've been watching March Madness for 20 plus years since I was a little kid. And usually that second weekend is the weekend where the teams who filter through to get to the Sweet 16 generally play their best basketball. Whether it's because of pressure, cold legs, whatever the reason is, they just did not play up to snuff from an entertainment, from a pure basketball, it was almost like the intensity was there, but it almost felt like the intensity had ratcheted down just a little bit from the second round. I felt like the second round was absolutely perfect. I felt like most of the games were just fantastic to watch, great down the stretch, scintillating, entertaining moments. Passion was on 10. Everything matched up in the second round. So I thought second weekend was going to just be out of this world. And like I said, like 3 or 4 games were great. But outside of that, kind of meh. Really, really glad I had my anniversary weekend this weekend because I really didn't need to tune into a whole lot of basketball. Just wasn't that great overall. I'll tell you what, though. I've been tuning into the NBA and I've been rewatching some games, the intensity level from teams who are desperate in the play-in situation, the Lakers, the Nets, Boston, there are some really, really desperate teams this late in the year. And it might adjust to what we see down the stretch next week after the national championship game when you've got a week left in the regular season. Something tells me this play-in, playoff situation over the next couple of weeks is going to be some of the best basketball we've seen in a while. And thank God for that. I mentioned that last week. You can hear it again. But I was just disappointed and bummed at the fact that a lot of the games in the NCAA tournament this weekend weren't that good. Like, obviously, the Purdue St. Peter's game. If you're not a purist, it was entertaining. And that's all they ask for, and that's all they care about. And you got that. If you got to watch that game, definitely entertaining. From a basketball purist perspective, it was frustrating because you didn't get to see Purdue make their shots. That's all that game came back to. Purdue executed down the stretch of that game to win. They just didn't make their shots. Sometimes that happens, and that's just what happened to Purdue. That's what you need if you're a 15 seed and you're playing a 3. That's what you have to do, and that's what happened. Good on St. Peter's. They took advantage. They did what they were supposed to do. But Purdue just didn't make their shots. Sometimes that happens. That was not Purdue's night. It was really frustrating to watch from that angle. Watching UCLA just absolutely fizzle out in the middle of a great game in the last 10 minutes, just absolutely disappear. Arizona just disappear late. There was just a lot of that. Gonzaga really not playing great basketball in the last couple minutes of that game. Just really, really unfortunate events. And again, maybe this is it. Maybe this is a fluke year. Maybe this is a different thing. Because the year before, last year, in 2021, when Gonzaga was undefeated going through, I felt like there was a big storyline with that. And there was a lot of weird, interesting things because obviously the fan situation and the bubbles and all these things. But in regards to how it all played out, I felt like last year it was entertaining in a interesting way, but the basketball was good. I felt like the basketball was good last year. This year the basketball's good, but guys are depleted more late in games, late in the year more than I could remember. And it was almost clockwork, like in the Elite Eight when I was watching some of the highlights. I'm like, man, some of these guys just look exhausted. Some of these guys just don't have the legs, and they're not playing up to their level, which is why St. Peter's beat Purdue. It was strictly legs. That's what it came down to. And I don't know. It's just disappointing from that perspective because, like I said, I'd love to see top teams play at their top level. And we're going to have a great Final Four. I think both games are going to be fantastic from an entertainment, from a historical, from a, championship pedigree level. Obviously, the only team in this field of the Final Four that really is not qualified just because of coaching, not because of talent, just because of coaching overall, is the Tar Heels. I mean, that's just obvious. We all know they shouldn't be here. It's a phenomenal job done by Hubert. But I don't think that overall they should be there. They just made it through what they needed to do. Unfortunately, in the Elite Eight, they played a 15 seed, which has never happened before. So they were handed a little bit of an easier hand. I honestly thought Purdue would be the team that would come out of that conference. I think Baylor was the 1 seed, if I'm not mistaken, because UNC beat Baylor. So I think the 1 seed would have been Baylor, and then they would have played Baylor, and Purdue would have played in the Elite Eight in a normal world. But obviously what UNC did in the second round, and obviously Purdue running out of legs against St. Peter's, that's what March Madness is all about, right? And this is the one team, they're the Cinderella, but you don't consider UNC's not a historical Cinderella. You could put UNC as a 12th seed. They're not a Cinderella. Like they always have the talent to do what they've done. Historically, they've never been known as that. So overall, from a expectation perspective, they are supposed to be here. And with the field they were handed, they beat the 1 seed in their bracket. So they deserve to be here. Yeah, okay, they played St. Peter's, whoop-de-doo. But they beat UCLA, who's a solid program, a really, really solid program. They beat Baylor. And I forget who they played in that 9 spot. If I'm not mistaken, They played, so they had to have played Thursday, right? Let's get back to it. UNC. They played Marquette, and they destroyed Marquette. I mean, they absolutely manhandled Marquette. So they manhandled Marquette. They played Baylor to a T. It was a phenomenal basketball game, entertaining, pure basketball purist perspective. Came back, did it, almost blew, coming back, right? They were up big and almost blew it. What, up 23 years, 24, 25, whatever. And then they played, on Friday, played UCLA, who another fantastic program, and then obviously blowing out St. Peter's. They did what they were supposed to do. They played two great teams in UCLA and Baylor and beat them, and they did what they were supposed to do against Marquette and St. Peter's. No one's going to sit here and say, "Well, UNC got an easy route to the tourney or to the Final Four." No, they deserved where they got to get to. Duke, number 2 seed. They're supposed to get here. Kansas, they're supposed to get here. They're a 1 seed, for God's sakes. And then you look at Villanova. They've won championships before. They got Jay Wright. They're one of the most well-coached teams in all of basketball. So everybody who got here on merits. Nobody got lucky getting here. That's just the facts. And if anything, UNC's lucky because they almost blew a lead to Baylor. So outside of that, everything happened the way it was supposed to happen. And I'm really excited for the Final Four coming up. I'm really excited for a lot of NBA games this week. I understand tomorrow that I think it's tomorrow. Is it tomorrow or was it yesterday? I can't remember. I'm doing the podcast on Sunday night. I can't remember. I believe it's Monday, if I'm not mistaken. No. Well, first of all, Warriors Grizzlies will have played Monday before the drop of this podcast. But no, it is tomorrow. It's Suns Warriors, and I understand the Warriors have injury situations and they're trying to figure things out and they're kind of fading. But I still feel like Suns Warriors from an X's and O's perspective is an interesting one to watch on Wednesday, because seeing how they play, even though they're different squads compared to what they were in December when they played two times in a row, or two, pretty much back to back within the same week. And obviously they played on Christmas Day. They're different teams right now. And the Suns are on all cylinders, and the Warriors are still kind of coming in clunky because they don't have Steph or they've had their injuries going on. But that's going to be an interesting one from an X's and O's perspective, from a second tier perspective. When both benches are in there playing and doing what they're doing, we're still going to see the overall structure. So watching that from a purist perspective is going to be fascinating, because 2 months from now they're going to be duking it out for the Western Conference Championship. That's going to be the case. So that's an interesting one to watch. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, on Friday there's some interesting games as well. I don't know overall what the scenario is, but Suns Grizzlies is an interesting game. That's the current 1-2 seed. You could easily see that in the Western Conference Finals after Friday. Easily. Bucks Nets on Thursday. Big time matchup. Both teams healthy. Obviously, Kyrie's going to play. We know about the Kyrie situation. He's been given full reign to play. That came into effect on Wednesday night or Thursday night when he could play again in Brooklyn. That will be the case. That's going to be a massive game. The Lakers and Jazz play Thursday as well. There's a lot of incredible games coming up from an just overall hunger, from a matchup, from an interesting perspective. And then Sunday, obviously, there's a bunch of incredible games that are going to pop up. You've got the Mavericks and Bucks. You've got the Nuggets and Lakers. There's a lot of things coming down the stretch here in the NBA regular season, which we're going to talk about next week more as we hit the stretch run. Down the stretch they come. Episode 29, we'll talk about that more. But I wanted to get my college basketball thoughts in, because the fascinating conundrum that comes up this week in college basketball is you've got the last Duke North Carolina matchup ever, and it's in the Final Four. How sweet is that? Jim Nantz, Grant Hill, I would assume Bill Raftery, they're all in there talking about who, the legend of the sport, Mike Krzyzewski, in his final game against North Carolina on the biggest stage. It doesn't get any better than that. But when we look at Mike Krzyzewski, what a better time than now to give him his flowers. How many times has this man made it to the Final Four? In fact, let's look at it. Today, we're giving Coach K his flowers in the 2022 season, his final season coaching. What has he coached? 47 years? Because he coached at Army for a long time. He was an assistant at Indiana, and then he was a coach at Army. And then from 1980 until now, he's the Duke head coach until this weekend. He's been the Duke head coach. And overall, looking at his resume, this is where he sits. Overall, at Duke, he's got 1,129 victories. He's one away from 1,130. He now has 1,202 victories in his career. And he has 101, or excuse me, I think he's got 101 NCAA tournament victories. He's 101 and 30, 1,202 and 367. He coached at Army from 75 to 80, and then from 80 to now, he's built Duke into an absolute powerhouse. And he's taken Duke to 5 national championships, 91, 92, 01, 2010, and 2015. Final Fours. This is his 13th Final Four he's going into. 86, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 94, 99, 01, 04, 2010, and 2015. And to just give you some perspective, 3 of the last 4 Final Fours he went to, he eventually won the national championship. 01, 2010, 2015. How many ACC tournaments? 15. 13 ACC regular season championships. This man has absolutely blown the doors off of every single record you could ever hold in the sport. And what I think is an interesting phenomenon to talk about Coach K with, he's 75 years old. He's retiring after this season, 42 years at Duke, 47 years coaching overall. What I think is absolutely, utterly fascinating is that from a 42-year perspective, how many victories is that? If he wins this weekend, that's 1-1-3-0, 42 years. If you really break it down, what is that? 22, 20, easily 20 victories a year. If you really break it down, at least at a minimum, maybe 25. That is insane. That is a winning record. That is a tournament appearance almost every single year at a university that was never known for basketball even before Duke, ever. I think he was the only head coach at Duke, if I'm not mistaken. And if before that, there was barely anybody. But he is so far and away ahead of everybody in the record books as a college head coach that it might never, ever happen again from the longevity perspective, just based upon where we are in today's era. Coach K, by the time he hit 20 years at Duke, was around the time we started seeing the hot seat of coaches within all sports in the early 2000s. That was when we first started seeing it. And Coach K, by the time he got to the 2010s, he'd been 30 years in. Who's going to really get rid of him at that point? You look at what he did for Team USA, getting all the golds and being the head coach of Team USA and always being around and being grateful for coaching the teams the way he could. His ability to really read players and be there for his guys no matter what. I think one of the most remarkable things I saw, if I'm not mistaken, it was either against Texas Tech or Michigan State, either the second round game or the Sweet 16 game. One of the most remarkable things I saw was a guy went down with an injury, and Coach K sitting there 42 years into this. I mean, you start to fathom the insanity of the longevity of what he's done. All these kids that he's coaching were born in the 2000s. And by then, he had already been a college basketball Hall of Famer. For the entirety of these kids' lives right now in college basketball, who he's coaching, he has been a basketball Hall of Famer as a coach. Like, just fathom that. And the records he holds from a win longevity perspective, I don't think will be broken. I think a couple guys who may get close are like a Mark Few, or there's a couple other names out there. Maybe an Izzo, but he has to play a lot longer. There's a lot of names out there where when you start to break them down, you're like, okay, maybe they could do it, but they have to make this their life journey. This man is 75 years old. He's been on this team for 42 years. He's been coaching for 47 years. He's been coaching for way over half his life. You have to coach forever to get to 1,200 victories in your career. That is forever. And you have to be so insanely successful. You have to be so insanely successful to have the opportunities to do that all the time. And when you watch Coach K walk around now with his wife, walking out of the games, walking to the games, holding hands, he looks like what I think we all would envision Coach Wooden to look like back in the day. Walking in and out, older gentleman, frail, tired, way, way, way past everything. Still loves the game, but he is not in any way, shape, or form at an all-time peak level of where he is. You can tell from everything that's been going on in the tournament with him that he is just ready to be done. And I think he was ready to be done about a year ago, but I think he just wanted to really fully grasp it and say, you know what, I need to do it because I owe it to these kids, because he's that kind of guy. And when he was sitting there with an injured player 42 years into his coaching career at Duke, on a knee, really asking him from a personal perspective, hey, do you feel this here? Are you okay? Just remember, like, if you are feeling something, do this, etc. And in the middle of everybody showing compassion and reverence and empathy and, solidarity with a player who could just as easily, be one of his grandkids. I mean, that is the stuff beyond legends. That is the stuff of icons in the game that you can never, ever, ever, ever take for granted. Every time he does a post-game interview, he has the perfect answers. He tells people, I'm just so blessed to be coaching these players, because at the end of the day, it comes down to them. He talks about the simplicity of the game to the degree in that he has forgotten more basketball than any of us who ever have covered the sport to this day will ever even understand. It is the level of types of players over the years that you have to coach through the changes, through the mentalities, through the generations, through the body types, through the team types, through the personnel, through the athletic directors, through the front office people within the entire program, through the staffing, just doing that for 40 something years and being incredibly successful. Okay, I know Chris, he gets some of the best recruits ever. He gets number 1 draft picks, all this stuff. But here's the thing. You still have to provide and be successful consistently. I understand you have more talent the better you are, but you have to build that from something. And he built that from nothing at Duke. And to be where he is, and to be 42 years into this, 47 years overall as a head coach, 75 years old, doing this his entire life, at the degree in which he's done it every single year, really from the mid-'80s to now. That's 36, 35, 36 years of having consistent dominance within a sport at the highest level of the biggest program and the biggest of it. What more do you want? Outside of him being an NBA head coach, what more do you want? You look at guys like Nick Saban in the NFL, or excuse me, in college football, and you look at guys like even Brian Kelly when he was at Notre Dame, or when you look at other names of guys who have done it for a long time, Bear Bryant, Joe Pa. I know Joe Pa's got a lot of, stink on his name from what happened at Penn State, and especially the later halves of his time. Jimbo Fisher, or any legendary head coach who did it for years and years and years. And when they do it at the highest peak and the toughest conferences and the highest levels of Division One sports, it gets to a point where you're like, my God, this guy's an entire empire. And on top of that, he wasn't just the head coach at Duke. He was the head coach of the entire United States men's basketball team to win gold medals overseas. So he's not just using and recruiting and perfecting his craft for his basketball Candace from November through March, which is already a 5 to 6 month endeavor on top of recruiting, on top of whatever he has to do. Now you're talking about having to go overseas in the summer and tell grown ass men who make probably, let's be 100% honest, about 3 or 4 times more than he does from a financial perspective, and basically telling them, if you don't go my way, you're not going to win at all. Granted, if they're all superstars and they're all playing against everybody else, it doesn't really matter. But from an overall perspective, the respect level that people have to play at the level that he demands and that he requires for you to be successful is just, it's the kind of stuff that I think everybody should shoot towards as a goal. I think everybody idolizes Coach Wooden for obvious reasons, Bob Knight for obvious reasons, because you have to remember, Coach K came from the Bob Knight tree. He was an assistant at Indiana for a year or two before he went to go coach at Army. He understands where he needs to pull from for you to be successful. I did a thesis in college about coaching and learning and where it comes from. And the one thing I came across of that thesis that I made, fairly simple thesis, I got like a C plus on it because the topic was too narrow of a subject. I majored in psychology. And my main antithesis and my main hypothesis was, how do you get the most out of a subject, a person, a client? How do you get the most out of a person or a subject or a client in regards to learning? How can you get them to learn and do something at the highest level possible? And there were two things that came from that overall thing, that all the articles I ever read. Two. The two ways you learn, black and white. It doesn't matter the color, black and white. This is what it was. It was either you learn from your environment or you learn from a specific subject. You learn from the person or the head figure, the teacher. You either learned best through their teaching or the environment taught you. And that became a firm staple in my entire thesis, in everything that I put together. And everything that I created within that thesis is exactly what a guy like Coach K can provide. And everything that he has done for the University of Duke is something that we all should aspire to do if we're aspiring to not just coach, but teach people into how to become the most successful at what they can do. And I can guarantee you Coach K does all of those things that I mentioned in my little tiny itty-bitty bachelor's degree thesis that I made at a 4-year institution. I can guarantee you he's the one that utilized both of those to an absolute T with every single person he ever came in contact with. I can't speak to the person, the interactions and the relationships that he has with his players on or off the court in time of when they're playing or when they're retired. I can't speak to that, but everything that I have ever heard has been mutual respect, has been, that he did everything he could for the betterment of anybody that he was around regarding their availability to learn, to get blank done, to get whatever they needed to get done the right way, and to the degree in which you wanted. That's all you can ask for in an educator, whether it's educator in a university, whether it's an educator on a athletic competition, whether it's an educator in being a parent, whether it's an educator in being a counselor of some sort of degree regarding like a daycare center, etc. That's all you can ask for. And this man has been able to weave and do it for really 2 or 3 generations of human beings, right? You're talking, generations before my time, back in the 80s. And then you're talking about 90s and 2000s kids. And then you're talking about the 2010s where Now you're talking about kids for him at his age are basically the same age as his grandparents. Then you're talking about, or same age as him being their grandparent. Then you're talking about when he first started at the age of 42 years ago. So 42 minus 75, you're talking about 73, 33. You're talking about kids in the early 80s that were at the ages of, 18 to 22 years old who were only 10 years removed from him. He's teaching them to getting them to believe in his system. And then honestly, by the time he is retiring, he's now teaching kids who are basically as old as his grandparents. He's done it the entire stratosphere of every angle. That is what we all should remember from Coach K. It's his ability to adjust and adapt to the generations that he is leading the legacies for. And you can even pinpoint him. He went to the Final Four in the 80s. He went to the Final Four in the 90s. He won championships in the 90s, in 2001, in 2010, in 2015. It is not like he was great for a 10-year stretch and then he's been mediocre. No. He has been the epitome of what you want in a head coach and what he's always done as a head coach. He has never, ever, ever been something that has sat on his laurels and said, no, this is what I am. He is someone that constantly, every single year, is adjusting to the team he has. He never banks on what he's done as a success because every single year in college sports, it's different. Every single year, it's a different entity and a different project, a different puzzle, a different combination of players. He's never been the best, he's never had the best team in college basketball. Never. He's won 5 championships, but out of the 42 years he's coached this one program, that's 5 championships. That's in all reality, that's not really a lot. That's not a great percentage of winning championships in a 40-plus year span. But he did them in different time periods, meaning that he found with whatever puzzle piece he could create in all of the years he went to the Final Four, in all of the years he won championships, he could make it work to the degree in which you sat back and said, damn, he came in with all these freshmen, or he came in with an older squad, or he came in with guys who were transfers, or you name the scenario, Coach K has seen it. He could give you tips. He could tell you exactly what he did. And to be honest with you, that's one of the scariest parts about probably coaching against him, which is why I don't envy anybody if I was a head coach or if anybody who's in their highest level of coaching, why they would even want to think about coaching against him, because he probably knows every single button to push right now where he's at. And I would say honestly over the last probably decade has been the hardest time to coach against Coach K, because from an energy, from a mental, from a knowledge perspective, I don't know how you beat that. I don't know how you beat the chess player who's played chess for 40 plus years and has seen every single move in the book and ultimately can pinpoint on how to push a button from a certain kid who may have not seen a certain play at a certain time all year long, but he can find a way to get that kid to feel important for that split moment into making big shots. I mean, you saw Roach play against Texas Tech, hit 2 or 3 ultimately gigantic shots late in the game, when they were up against the screws and they had no shot to win the game because Texas Tech was playing phenomenal. And the next thing you know, Roach hits back-to-back jumpers to give Duke a comfortable lead to win the game, when, frankly, I have never heard of this kid in my life. And out of nowhere, he comes in and shoots clutch jumpers to win ball games in the biggest time of the year in March Madness. That's Coach K. It all comes back to him in regards to that capability. So, I wanted to give his flowers. I wanted to tell him a big send-off and say, arrivederci, see you later, head coach. We're never going to see you again, and the ACC will never be the same without you. So I hope he can win his 6th chip this year in March Madness, but if not, it's all good. He's in the Final Four. He did his job. All right, that's it for the episode this week. We'll be back on Season 8, Episode 29. Down the stretch they come in the NBA regular season. We've got a week left coming into next week, and then we have the play-in tournament, which we will talk about on episode 30 the week after that. But I wanted to get in and talk about, obviously, the championship game. We'll break that down after Monday night, and then obviously we'll break down what is going on in the league and where we stand with the final week going down the stretch. All right, have a good one. Thank you.